9 more to go. Look who just came out on the stage. Cory Booker, Senator Booker. Hello, Senator Booker. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
Fine. Spartacus is in the building.
Uh-oh. Good morning, everybody.
You now have 2 minutes of an opening statement.
Well, I just want to say how good it is to be back here in Detroit. My family hails from this city. This is where my mama was born, and this in many ways was the start of our American dream. We have an existential crisis in this country, which is the presidency of Donald Trump, ripping our nation apart. We have to make sure that we win this next election. And we know there has been no great movement for social change, political change, or economic change in this country without African American communities being a part of that transformation. And we must have leaders that don't just come to our communities and ask us for their vote, but that know our communities, are engaged in our communities, and partner with our communities. Because if we do not have that, we will not win. I believe this election has to be not just about what we are against, but by what we are for. And we've got to articulate a vision that is inclusive of all of America. Because we know in communities like mine, where I was the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, we know that the challenges we have did not begin with Donald Trump, and beating him is not enough. Beating Donald Trump is a floor, it is not the ceiling. It gets us out of the valley, but it does not get us to the mountaintop. And when it comes to issues of systematic economic disempowerment, when it comes to issues of gun violence or attacks on public education, we must be ready to bring a fight not just to the election, but to actually getting transformative things done from Washington to our communities. Thank you very much, April.
All right. So as an active senator, I'm going to ask you the same question. Robert Mueller's in Washington.
Yes.
And he said the president is not exonerated of obstruction of justice. So what say you about that?
Well, you read the Mueller report and you see quite clearly that he spells out behaviors, deceit, instructing people to lie and cover things up. That report is enough of an indication that the House of Representatives should begin impeachment proceedings against this president.
Okay.
And I am proud that the NAACP today resolved to do that. We should do just that.
Okay.
But again, this is a Congress right now that's divided. It's a Senate that's controlled by the Republicans. What we ultimately must be prepared to do, should Congress fail, remember, the power of the people is greater than the people in power. And we need to be ready to beat Donald Trump soundly in the 2020 elections, and that's why I'm running for president.
All right. So a new DOJ report shows, and I know you know about this report, that Newark, New Jersey has the worst record on police-involved abuses. You were the proud mayor of that city. What would you do as president to fix the issues of Newark and other cities like Newark, if elected president?
Well, we inherited in Newark, New Jersey, a police department with decades-long challenges with accountability, decade-long challenges with transparency. And we ended up working with the ACLU to create national standard-setting accountability measures. Police accountability is critical. We saw this most recently with Eric Garner and what happened with him and the DOJ here on the federal level failing to do what is necessary. You can't have safe, strong communities unless you have an accountable police department that has legitimate connection to our communities. And so police accountability is essential. And so already, this is not about what I'm going to do as President of the United States, already I've introduced legislation to begin to hold police departments around our country accountable, to force them to produce information, including on uses of force and police-involved shootings. And so as President of the United States, I'm going to make sure that we have a plan for broad-based criminal justice reform, because we have gotten to a distraught present. We now have more African Americans under criminal supervision than all the slaves in 1850. We have a system that is deeply biased along racial lines, and that is from policing to incarceration to even the opportunities that come from reentry. This is a system of mass incarceration that I'm determined to tear down So we have a system in America that isn't like Brian Stevenson says, where he says we have a system that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. We will have a system that reflects our values, and I will be the president that brings that finally to be.
So, Senator Booker, you brought up Eric Garner. If you happen to be mayor of New York City, or if Eric Garner were in your district, would you have sought for charges against the officer that fatally choked Eric Garner?
So, April, we live in a country now where we see these things happening on videotape that are clear to our eyes. Mm-hmm. Eric Garner was selling loose cigarettes, and yet he was suddenly put into a chokehold and killed. So yes, I would have brought charges, but this is what we have to understand. For every video that we see, there are thousands of incidents that we don't. For every name that we know, there are thousands of others that we don't know. The critical key for the next president is to have a Department of Justice, not like this president who is pulling back investigations and consent decrees on police departments. But we need to have a Department of Justice that is actively working to stop the oppression of poor communities, of minority communities, and the uses of force that are unacceptable in a nation with our values.
This is the 400th anniversary of slaves coming to this nation. And you brought up Africa a minute ago. Why does Africa matter to this country?
You know, look, we are a nation that is a part of a larger planet. And so from issues of climate change to issues of dealing with our economic security as a nation, Africa is a continent of extraordinary value, not just in the worth of the people, but in the larger global context. And what you see now is a competition on the planet Earth between authoritarian regimes and free democracies. I was the head in the Senate of the Democrats on the Africa Committee. And I was flying to Africa with a Republican in a bipartisan group to talk to the new leader of Zimbabwe to push him to have free and fair elections. And as we were landing, Mnangagwa, the new leader, was landing from China, where China was saying to him, we don't care about your values. We don't care about free and fair elections. We just want to be able to extract your industry, extract your minerals. This is the kind of competition that's going on. America has a role in the world, and what this president is doing right now is he calls African countries S-hole countries. It demeans and degrades other planets. He's isolating our nation from other nations in the world, including our allies. It is time for the United States to lead again and be a leading force of light, of justice, and democracy, not an isolated nation turning its back on its allies and allowing totalitarian and authoritarian governments to have sway.
And in our last minute of Q&A, some of the top issues of our nation's veterans are mental health, homelessness, access to services, and unemployment. How do you plan to bridge the divide that has crippled the Department of Veterans Affairs?
Look, we see a nation that seems to come up with enough money to send people overseas, often to wars and engagements we shouldn't be in, trillions of dollars of our taxpayer money going there. But when they come home, we plead poverty and not have the resources to provide for them when they come home. I mean, we are literally a nation that sings in our national anthem. It ends with, we are the home of the brave, but yet our veterans are disproportionately homeless. As President of the United States, I will step up to our obligations and understand that we need to have a healthcare system, a VA system, a housing system that works. And especially as our veterans are coming home
7 seconds.
are coming home with invisible challenges. We need to show that we are a nation of courageous empathy, that we are a nation of love, that all of our citizens, from our veterans, from our low-income folks, all of our citizens are there. And so in closing,
there we go.
And I appreciate you doing this.
Thank you, sir.
Look, I am tired of watching presidential elections in the past where folks aren't speaking to the realities of issues of African Americans. And to see issues like housing, economic empowerment, healthcare disparities, even disparities in access to capital, because the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in America are African American women. I will be a president that will beat Donald Trump first and foremost by inspiring a critical element of our coalition, which is African American voters, to turn out. But I will make sure, just like as a United States senator, who when I got to the Senate and saw that there were not African Americans fairly represented on Senate staffs or even on committees like the Judiciary Committee, to make sure that we as African Americans are at the table when decisions are being made about our communities. And even more than that, to make sure that we focus on the critical issues where you see right now unfair disparities in our nation. Disparities in income, disparities in opportunity, disparities in education. We will never be the nation we say we are of liberty and justice for all unless we begin to lead as a nation that invests in all of our communities. And I want to say this, finally.
28 seconds.
This is the most important election of our lifetime. And we in African American communities will determine the destiny of our nation. We are too critical of a campaign. And so as your candidate, I will make sure that when we come to communities like Detroit, we just don't talk to people, but we invest in those communities. We elevate leadership from these communities and make sure that ultimately the victory is shared by every community in our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you so much. Candidate Cory Booker. Candidate Cory Booker. 2 down and 8 more to go. Are you getting needed information that you're not hearing in other places?